I would like to welcome Sarah Zborowski in the Healthcare and Life Sciences Group, whose practices focuses on healthcare regulation and healthcare products. Sarah is joining us today to talk about some of the changes that have occurred in the regulatory environment as a result of COVID and what those changes mean going forward in the future. One thing that's become clear over the last few months is we've all become accustomed to words like PPE and ventilators and sanitizers, all these new products that have become part of our daily lexicon. We wanted to ask you to address how you have seen, being on the front lines from a regulatory perspective, these products in terms of the regulatory response to adding these new products to our consumer environment, and how the regulators have treated these products and will treat these products going forward, and what does it mean from a regulatory point of view in dealing with these new products?
Sure. So the first thing to note about all of these products is that they're regulated by Health Canada. So they either meet the definition of a drug, which is defined in the Food and Drugs Act as a substance that's manufactured for use in diagnosing, treating, mitigating, or preventing a disease or disorder, or for disinfecting. Or these products meet the definition of a medical device, which is defined as an instrument that's manufactured or sold for use in diagnosing, treating, mitigating, or preventing a disease or disorder. Both drugs and devices require approval from Health Canada before they can be advertised or sold in Canada. And in addition to the license for the product itself, there are license requirements for the site at which the product is made or manufactured. And if they're made outside of Canada, there are also license requirements for the importer or importers of the product. Traditionally and generally, these approval processes are not fast. However, and this is where things got interesting, in recognizing that there was a significant need and a significantly increasing need for COVID-related drugs and medical devices, back in March, Health Canada started introducing some interim measures to facilitate expedited and broader access to these products. So before I get into that, it's important to know that Health Canada generally regulates products according to a risk-based approach. And so what we're seeing in the case of COVID-19 is a clear shift in the risk assessment connected to products that are being manufactured and sold in connection with the pandemic, whereby Health Canada is expediting approvals without requiring the same amount of evidence on safety, efficacy, and quality as traditionally required, in favor of expediting access in cases where Health Canada has determined that there's enough evidence associated with the COVID-19 product to outweigh the risks of not having enough product on the market. And so what we've seen on the drug side is Health Canada's introduced interim policies regarding disinfectants and hand sanitizers. So to set the stage, I read this really interesting statistic from Stats Canada that said that the demand for hand sanitizer increased by 735% for the week ending March 14th, 2020, relative to the same period last year. So as a result, what we saw in sort of middle to late March was a large number of companies that were not previously manufacturing or importing hand sanitizers, all of a sudden expressing an interest in getting into the hand sanitizer and disinfectant game in order to support the need for these products in light of COVID. So back in March and April, when this started happening, Health Canada implemented a number of interim policies to facilitate expedited access to products that might not otherwise fully meet the regulatory requirements in order to allow for the products to come into Canada. So for example, our government has accepted certain products from requirements around bilingual labeling on the product itself, in favor of allowing importers to post bilingual labeling, for example, on their websites. In addition, Health Canada implemented interim expedited licensing approach specifically for hand sanitizers. So what they essentially did was simplify the application for these products And they've been prioritizing review processes for both products, so hand sanitizers themselves, and the site licenses that are required for sanitizers. And in order to increase transparency and keep Canadians informed about what they're doing in order to facilitate the entry of these products to market, Health Canada has introduced and now maintains an up-to-date list of disinfectants that have been approved for use against COVID-19, as well as an up-to-date list of hand sanitizers approved for sale in Canada. It's important to note that at my last check, there's been no hand sanitizer approved with a specific COVID-related claim, but Health Canada has taken the view that hand sanitizers in generally are useful in these pandemic times and is maintaining this list of approved hand sanitizers. They're also publishing information on quality requirements to ensure that any alcohol used in the preparation or distribution of hand sanitizers is safe. So leaving the drug side and moving over to the device side, we've seen two interim policies introduced by Health Canada regarding medical devices for use in relation to COVID-19. So what we're talking about when we're saying medical device here is really masks, respirators, eye protection, gowns, swabs, gloves, ventilators, testing devices. All of those products are generally regulated as devices, and they are all regulated as COVID-related devices in these times. So the first interim measure that we saw for these products was intended to speed up the review of applications for medical devices. In large part, this has been facilitated by Health Canada exempting these applications from certain requirements of the regulations, as well as by allowing manufacturers to rely on the approval of the device by a foreign regulatory authority, which was not previously permitted. The second interim measure that we've seen for these device products allows for certain medical devices that may not fully meet regulatory requirements to be imported and sold in Canada. This is similar to the situation with hand sanitizers and disinfectants. Essentially, Health Canada is allowing for non-bilingual labeled devices to come into Canada. And also similarly to hand sanitizers and disinfectants, Health Canada has started to maintain and is maintaining a public list of medical devices that have been approved and are being marketed in connection with COVID-19. In addition to these measures, Health Canada, which is a federal regulator, is working closely with provincial governments and industry to monitor the impact of COVID-19 on the supply of prescription and over-the-counter drugs and medical devices in order to address any potential disruptions. So Health Canada has reminded companies that market prescription and over-the-counter drugs that they must report anticipated or actual drug shortages, and they've asked industry stakeholder associations to notify Health Canada of any early signals or of shortages related to COVID-19. So drugs that are manufactured in countries outside of Canada where there was issues with import or export for that country, where we had some shortage issues, Health Canada is also keeping its finger on the pulse of that issue as well.
Sarah, it appears that there's been some new sales and distribution channels for these products that we haven't seen before, and I wanted to ask you, given these new channels, what do you think the impact is for the industry, both in the short term and the long term, when you're seeing what appears to be a whole new realm of distribution of these regulated products, which used to be very much more tightly regulated in terms of distribution and sales?
Yeah, so you've hit on, I think, probably one of the biggest changes to the therapeutic product industry as a result of COVID-19 is really the face of the industry. We've seen a lot of really great early pivoting by existing businesses to serve this market. A large number of companies that were not previously manufacturing or importing therapeutic products like medical devices or drugs have expressed an interest in doing so in order to support COVID-19 response efforts. So in order to facilitate all of this new help, Health Canada has expedited the approvals required for the establishments that import or manufacture COVID-related drugs and devices. And in addition, we're seeing increasing opportunities for industry to partner with provincial governments, particularly in the wake of COVID. So provincial governments we're seeing are now contracting with industry for the provision of hand sanitizers, disinfectants, and personal protective equipment. So while these distribution channels have always been open, I'd say what we're seeing now that's much different is a huge increase in scope, both in terms of the number of industry players that are being invited to contract with the provincial government and the amounts of product being purchased. So really the value of these contracts has gone up exponentially as this pandemic has hit. The other thing that we should note is that alongside of all of these new opportunities, we're seeing quite a bit of increasing enforcement by Health Canada. As I mentioned before, Health Canada is a risk-based regulator, so they take a risk-based approach to compliance and enforcement. And what we're seeing is a fair bit of public warning from Health Canada to Canadians to be careful about buying products, including drugs and medical devices, that are make any claims relating to the prevention or treatment of COVID-19. So the products that we're seeing Health Canada focus on in this regard are masks, some disinfectants, plant-based elixirs and formulas, hand sanitizers, ultraviolet lamps, oregano oil. In addition, we've seen a number of recalls of hand sanitizers, unauthorized test kits, and masks. And then the third piece I would say that I find really interesting and exciting is we're seeing increased research and development initiatives aimed at really supporting Canadian industry. One example is the National Research Council of Canada collaborating with Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada in order to support and really promote small and medium-sized businesses who are working to find solutions to COVID-related needs. Another example is the National Research Council's Pandemic Response Challenge program, which brings together what they say is the best Canadian and international researchers to fast-track research and development aimed at specific COVID gaps and challenges that have been identified by Canadian healthcare experts, with the goal being to accelerate the development of diagnostic tools, medical countermeasures for a rapid frontline response in order to project and treat Canadians affected by the pandemic. And I think as we continue to see Canadian research and development in the space, we'll continue to also see additional marketing opportunities for industry, greater access for Canadians and the Canadian healthcare system.
With all these new players and new participants in the market, as you look to the future of the regulatory environment, post-COVID, I wanted to get your thoughts on how do these new players stay relevant? Given in a post-COVID world, they've obviously entered the market, have a particular reason to be relevant, but as the market evolves, as one hopes that COVID passes, what are your thoughts on how these products and businesses can continue to be and stay relevant?
So I think there's going to be a lot of room post-pandemic for continued increased access to certain products, particularly hand sanitizers and disinfectants and personal protective equipment like masks. I don't think we as a society are going to stop the increased use of these products anytime soon. While we may not see an increased surge in demand or a continued surge in demand, I do believe that the demand for these products will remain higher than it was in pre-COVID times. So companies that came out early and with good products, or companies that come out late with exceptional products, are likely to retain some of this market share for a long time to come. That being said, I also think Health Canada will eventually stop expediting approval of COVID-related drugs and medical devices. The interim orders that they have put in place really reference and are based in an urgent public need for products. And so once that urgent public need is no longer either because the pandemic passes and or because we have enough supply in the market to meet demand, I think Health Canada will stop those expedited processes for approval. It's also important to note that any product that was approved pursuant to an interim order or that was otherwise approved in order to address the COVID pandemic may expire and or need to be reevaluated once the pandemic has passed. So that's something important for industry to keep in mind. In terms of lessons for the future, I'm watching to see if Health Canada's reliance or its increased reliance on foreign approvals for COVID-related products will translate into future cooperation with foreign regulators and maybe an increased comfort on the part of Health Canada to rely at least in part on another regulator's approval. This is something that Health Canada has been talking about for a long time and is part of its modernization efforts, but we sort of see a bunch of starts and stops. So this COVID pandemic is really the first time we've seen this regulator develop a comprehensive approach that allows industry to rely on foreign regulatory approvals. And I think it'll be interesting to see if this translates into new approval pathways or abbreviated approvals for non-COVID related drugs or devices.
And Sarah, I wanted to drill down on something you just mentioned, which is, the government of Canada has responded in ways we've never imagined to this crisis. And I wanted to get, in particular, your thoughts on, one characteristic that's been prevalent to all of us, and you mentioned it, which is just the speed at which the regulators are working to approve product in a way that we've never seen before. And the pace that they're working at and how they're making decisions quickly. I mean, they've really kind of themselves pivoted, and we're just seeing governments respond in a manner we're just not used to seeing them respond. Do you think this is a catalyst to maybe something more fundamental? Has COVID created a new ethos on the regulatory in the regulatory environment that will survive post COVID, which is a kind of more nimble, quicker decision-making process for regulatory products and the regulatory environment?
So I would like to be able to say, yeah, I think that's exactly what's going to happen. But here's the issue with Health Canada. They are very risk-based. So everything that regulator does is based on an assessment of risk and benefit. They are also incredibly protectionist. So I regularly say that Health Canada is the most protectionist regulator in the world, or at least one of the most. So I don't think we're going to see a fundamental shift in the regulatory approval process or timelines outside of COVID. And I think everything I've read from Health Canada about why and how they're expediting is really tied into risk and their risk approach to regulation. So because the risk of COVID is so high and the benefit of putting product on the market is there, they've sort of allowed themselves to step away from risks associated with safety, quality, and efficacy for these products in this space, because the benefit of the product and getting them out there quickly outweighs the perceived risk perceived by the regulator of a normal or longer regulatory approval timeline. Once the COVID risk is gone or reduced significantly, either because the disease leaves or we get a vaccine or because we have enough products on the market to suitably treat and or protect our Canadian population, I think that the risk benefit will change again and will, as a result, sort of go back to the way it has always been. And I think the risk benefit hasn't changed, or the risk profile hasn't changed for products that fall outside of the COVID pandemic bucket. And so for those products, I think we can expect to see sort of things as usual. At most, what I'm hopeful for is maybe this being a bit of a pilot for Health Canada to show them that there are opportunities, maybe small opportunities, where the risk-benefit analysis is unique and that it can change its regulatory approval timelines and, to some extent, requirements where that risk profile has changed.